It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans, and I will be your host this morning. Thanks for joining us. Glad to have you on board. Hope you're catching us live on our website. If not, I hope you're catching us live on Patriot FB. And of course, there's plenty of other ways to catch America's Voice Now. We have a listen line that's open 24/7. You can listen live, or you can catch a pre-recorded version or the recorded version for that day anytime by simply dialing area code 415-325-0725. That number is given to us by Audio Now, and they provide a service that is radio over your phone. How awesome is that? So if you are a traveler, you'd like to listen to America's Voice Now, you can certainly do that. 415-325-0725. So we're going to try to hit on a few different issues this morning. It's all over the news in reference to the CIA and the Senate Oversight Committee. And so we're going to talk about that in two segments in our last portion of this morning. And I think it's important that we evaluate and analyze exactly what that is, because I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if ever there was an issue that expressed the level of the constitutional crisis we are in as a nation, this be it. It's bad enough that we have an executive that is completely out of control and that is operating in a lawless fashion. But when you have the CIA spying on the Oversight Committee that is charged with monitoring it and verifying that it is operating legally, and they are breaking the law and violating the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution and executive orders to do so, we have a rogue agency on our hands and a government completely out of control. Our first segment this morning is going to be the Obama immigration policy and how it is fraught with such lies and misinformation. Because one of the things that you keep hearing is that this administration is strong on rejecting and deporting immigrants. Well, it all came out yesterday in another hearing in which Jay Johnson, the new chief of DHS, exposed the truth. It's all a lie, and it's more treason, and I'm going to explain to you how the word treason plays in. He claims he's the toughest in history on the border. However, the way he's counting them, in typical fashion of this administration, boy, who recounts and rejustifies everything they do, he's counting those that they catch at the border. No other president in history has ever done that. He has only counted those caught within the interior of the United States. And so, as a result, illegals that already live in the interior have a 1%, less than 1% chance of being caught. Ladies and gentlemen, the policies that this president is instituting between what his deportation program and his initiation of the DREAM Act, which is completely against the law and completely against Congress's authorized dictates, and it's completely against the Constitution because he's not protecting our borders, is tantamount to treason. And I've got to tell you, we have reached so far down to the bottom of the barrel to scrape the dregs of hell. All right, our second topic is going to be the planet's fiscal crisis is nearing a bubble end. We're going to talk about things that the media is not telling you about. And I'm talking now here about a massive grinding or a massive grinding to a halt of the Chinese shadow banking scheme that's been going on. And you're not aware of it. And the reason you're not aware of it is because the media, the mainstream media, is withholding information from you. And the reason they do that is because they don't want to educate and inform you. They simply choose to entertain you. And I don't know where the shift came from doing their due diligence and doing their job of playing the fourth estate, the watchdog of government. But our media, and this is every media source out there, and it goes all the way from Fox News down to the worst of the worst of MSNBC, ABC, CBS, and NBC, which is perhaps the worst of the bunch. The media has completely and utterly failed to keep us informed of what's going on globally. And it's not just our media, it's the world's media. The markets are holding their breath. China's shadow banking is grinding to a halt. And the media is keeping us numb and pacified with Oscars, garbage, tripe, staged reality shows. The planet's going through the tremors of a global shakeup. Fiscal, political, ethical, moral. The world is in the quake of treason. And I cannot say it loudly enough, strenuously enough, or emphatically enough. I am encouraging you to prepare yourselves, your families, your homes with food, with medicine, with ammunition. I don't know when you're going to need it, but I do know one thing for sure. You're going to need it. So let's jump into our first topic this morning because this is a critical issue. We keep hearing about, well, first of all, recognize that the president constantly declares himself tough on immigrants. Now, we know that's not the truth because he has blatantly, boldly, and illegally given special consideration to immigrants across the board in the United States. And as a result of his efforts, we see the failure to, one, seal our borders, two, the open and blatant abuse of his constitutionally delegated duty to protect and defend the United States from invasion. And whether you choose to agree with it or not, I'm telling you right now that what's happening on our borders is an invasion. Not an armed invasion, but it is an invasion nonetheless. And when we look at the level of abuse that this president has applied to this, and I'm reminded now to bring to your attention the op-ed piece from Jonathan Turley, who's an Obama voter and an Obama supporter. He posted an op-ed yesterday in or March 9th, I should say, in the LA Times. And he's clear at the beginning. He says the president's power grab, and he writes a subtitle, of course, which is Obama is not a dictator, but there is a danger in his aggregation of executive power. And one of the things that he points to, among many others, including the vast abuses under the Obamacare issues, is that he has asked Congress to change the law to exempt certain classes of immigrants, particularly children, who are in the U.S. illegally from deportation. Congress refused to pass the DREAM Act. However, Obama has proceeded to then order agencies under executive orders to effectively guarantee the very same changes that Congress unanimously rejected. I shouldn't say unanimously. Let me stop that. That Congress boldly rejected. Now, he has gone outside of any boundary of the rule of law with that level of limitation on the deportation process, number one. Number two, when you look at the amount of illegals that have been deported under his administration, he does something utterly, totally, and completely dishonest in an attempt to change the public nature of how he is viewed. Let me clarify for you what happened. Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson, who's recently just taken over the position, on Tuesday, he acknowledged that the deportation numbers that are used by the administration are made up of illegal immigrants, mostly that are caught at the border. Now, the difference between what they're doing now and the number they're giving us, based on how many immigrants they're catching at the border and basically turning right around and ejecting back out, is done with dishonest intent, because every other president in history has not counted that way. What they've counted are only those that they caught in the interior of the country. In other words, the assumption is that if you catch them coming across the border and they're caught at the border, you don't even count those, because those aren't real deportations. Those are rejections. But Obama is not doing that. He's counting those as deportations. And that is intentional, willful dishonesty. He had to admit it because he was in a congressional Senate or panel hearing. And the administration has argued that it's the toughest on illegal immigration out there. But it's more lies. Immigrant right groups are screaming at him because of his claim. But the truth is, he's really not kicking out more immigrants by any stretch of the imagination than prior presidents. Jay Johnson was asked by John Culberson. He's a Texas representative. And he said, he asked Johnson, he said, under the Obama administration, more than half of those removals that were attributed to ICE, which is Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement, are actually a result of Border Patrol arrests that wouldn't have counted in prior administrations. Is that correct? And Jay Johnson confirmed it by saying one word: correct. Now, what that tells you is that, in reality, the number of deportations under Obama have actually fallen in comparison to Bush, as an example. And don't misunderstand me, ladies and gentlemen. This is not a partisan issue. I am no supporter of Bush. He was a traitor to the nation. He did things to this country, including the Patriot Act and the initial NDAA and many other abusive policies, and his failure to seal and close the borders and prevent the invasion of the United States of America. So this is not some kind of a bombastic support of Bush, not by any stretch of the imagination. Those of you who are longtime listeners, you know that I am no supporter of the Bush administration, and I excoriate him on a routine basis. But I got to tell you, when you do a one-on-one comparison with the period in time for the Bush administration, the numbers are stunning. In 2013, ICE was responsible for about 133,000 of the 368 total immigrants that were removed. Now, the Washington Times has done this article, by the way, is posted in the Washington Times, and there'll be a link to it in the YouTube video. It's also on our website and our Facebook page and Patriot FB and a bunch of other places. The Washington Times has calculated that this means that less than 1% of the illegal immigrants that are already living in the interior of the United States are at risk of being deported. Less than 1%. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beyond a constitutional crisis with a president out of control. We are beyond a constitutional crisis with a president who feels that he can make dictatorial decisions and place executive orders in play that exceed his authority. We are beyond a constitutional crisis with a hand-wringing Congress who is inept, incompetent, and impotent. Impotent to stop him. Inept and incompetent on their own. And when we talk about what's going on with the CIA in our third and fourth segment, Holy smokes. The CIA has become a rogue agency. We're going to talk about that in segments 3 and 4, so don't miss that. That's going to be an excellent discussion. In fact, I'm dedicating 2 segments to it because it's that important. But when you're talking here about how the administration is prioritizing the deportations, there are no deportations. That's what we're trying to explain here. They're not deporting individuals. They're not deporting children. They're not deporting families. It's all a sham. You know what this administration reminds me of? A western town. You know, you see the old west towns where they have these buildings all along the main street, and they have these glamorous fronts. But when you look at the town from its side view, you see that it's a false front. These are 2- and 3-story, big false fronts on these buildings, and when you look at the back of them, they're made out of tents, or they're these rude, rough cabins. The impression is, of course, that you're going to walk into this magnificent under the facade of this building, and you get in there, and it's nothing but a tent with a dirt floor. That is this administration. A false front and a facade. And frankly, America, I cannot express to you enough how you must begin to awaken yourself and those around you to what is transpiring in our nation. Johnson comes out and says that they're prioritizing those they think deserve deportation. All right. Let me explain something to you. The law is not an optional. The law is not optionally enforced. There is a thing called prosecutorial discretion, and prosecutorial discretion certainly gives law enforcement the opportunity to say, listen, this may be a crime, but it's small enough that it's really not worthy of clogging up the court system, or it wasn't intentional, or whatever the case may be. But when we talk about prosecutorial discretion, we're not talking about, we're talking about whether or not a police officer should give you a ticket for going a few miles an hour over the speed limit. We're talking about whether or not you should be written a littering citation for tossing out a cigarette butt. We're talking about prosecutorial discretion in minor things. Now, I'm the first to tell you that there is a plethora of laws that do not exist or should not exist on the books. But I got to tell you, the Constitution is not to be trifled with, nor is it to be set aside, nor is it to be ignored, nor is your oath of office to be ignored and/or violated. And that is what they're doing. Johnson's excuse for claiming the prosecutorial discretion to deport only those they think deserve deportation is that he says in the past, illegal immigrants from Mexico who had just illegally crossed into the border would often be grabbed and captured, returned, in other words, ejected back over into their home border, only to try again immediately. And now many of them are put into full deportation proceedings. Quite frankly, look, when it comes to this issue of deportation and illegals, I know that this administration is desperate to open the floodgate. But it is up to us. It is up to us as the citizens of this nation to stand up and demand that it cease. We not only have to do that with our own government and our own administration and force them to effectively enforce the law, but we also have a whole other challenge here. And that is that the corporate or the corporatocracy of our nation is seeking to allow these floodgates to be opened so that they can have cheap labor and basically replace you. Those of you who don't recognize and understand exactly how far down the road we've gone with this had better get on the ball, because their intention is not to bring in intelligent, well-trained, educated engineers and so forth and so on. That's the smokescreen they use. It's the red herring. It's the false front they put out there. It's the facade. But the truth of the matter is they want low-skilled labor to replace you. Why? Well, because when you come here and you earn $6 and $7 or $8 an hour, and you've been living in a place where you earn $300, $500, $1,100 a year, the world's looking pretty rosy. And corporatocracy is interested in only one thing. They don't care about national sovereignty. They don't care about borders. They care about one thing: a good report to their investors on their quarterly reports or their semi-annual or annual report. They're willing to sell our nation down the river and betray us for a good quarterly report. Ladies and gentlemen, you can call it what you want, but make no mistake about it. What this president, this Department of Homeland Security, this Division of Border Security and ICE are doing is treason, because they are betraying the very sacred trust that they've been given by the people of the United States of America to protect us from an invasion. And it is working. We're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to tackle our second topic, which is the planet's fiscal crisis and the bubble of this fiscal smokescreen is coming to an end. We're going to talk a little bit about why and how that matters to you and what you can do about it. And I'm going to give you some examples of where you can look to watch for trouble. We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now. If you have an opportunity, please make sure that you visit and assist and patronize our sponsors. We have Express Mini Mart 1 and 2 locally in West Plains. They are located up on 1463 corner, or not on the corner, but straight across from that intersection in the old Granny's Cafe building. They have a drive-through there. Their other location is right across the street from the City Pool on Porter Wagoner Boulevard in West Plains, across from People's Park. Please make sure that you visit those folks. Go through the drive-through in either location. And they have the guaranteed lowest prices on cigarettes and guaranteed lowest prices on fountain drinks. So get in there, get yourself something to drink while you're grabbing a pack of smokes if you smoke, and take advantage of the services they offer there. Make sure that you see our friends over at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard while you're there, and swing in there and get yourself a great lunch, pizza bar, and a buffet every day, including a salad bar. You'll be happy you did. Jason Henry, over at the law offices of Jason Henry, please swing by there and see him or call him at 417-256-4100. That's 417-256-4100. We'll be right back. My name is Michael Evans, and you're listening to America's Voice. Thanks for joining with us. We are coming back from a quick commercial break. We're in our second segment of 4. Glad to have you on board. The issues that are exploding all over our nation are really pretty frightening. But it's not just here, folks. One of the things that you need to be aware of is that what's happening to our fiscal situation and our rule of law is not limited just to the United States of America. It's happening all over the world. The media has been derelict in their duty. And, I got an email from a guy the other day, and he said, these politicians in our country, and I'm going to just jump back to the domestic United States for a moment, should be labeled dishonorably discharged. Because when you are dishonorably discharged, you are labeled in a manner and in a fashion that exposes your dishonor and your lack of integrity, your lack of trust to the world. And I can't think of a better way to remove these people from Congress. You've got an election coming up, ladies and gentlemen. Every member of the House, every member is up for re-election. From John Boehner and Nancy Pelosi and that entire upper echelon leadership crew, all the way down to these freshmen who began 2 years ago. And I got to tell you, I don't think there's more than a handful that deserve to retain their jobs. And I mean that sincerely. I think we'd be hard-pressed to find 5 that should not be dishonorably discharged. Now, the world is leading itself down a fiscal path of complete and utter devastation. Yet the other day, and I posted it up on our sites and so forth, there was an article out about how the world's debt has now exceeded $100 trillion. Folks, $100 trillion. Now, this is just in hardcore front-facing debt, right? Like ours is $17 trillion, 17.4 at this point. Now, I want you to understand something. That's the best case scenario, because when we talk about forward-facing debt and 17 trillion in our case, 100 trillion globally, recognize something. That's only the debt that the books are showing that are exposed. That doesn't count in government guarantees for banks and bailouts. That doesn't cover the derivatives crisis, which is a $300 trillion risk. And not only we, but other nations have stood behind that and said, we'll put taxpayers on the hook for that. I got to point something obvious out to you. Because when you start talking in the trillions, people just kind of lose... they lose the ability to, put it into perspective. $1 trillion is too much for any of us to really grasp and get our hands or our arms around. But when you talk about $100 trillion, you have to realize that dollar figure exceeds the asset value of the entire planet. In other words, $100 trillion is greater than the asset value of the planet. We couldn't sell ourselves to Saturn or, Mars for $100 trillion. If they were looking at Earth as an acquisition target, they would reject us because we are so far down the road of bankruptcy that it would be impossible to turn this business, if you will, around. Now, there's an article out about how the markets are holding their breath as China's shadow banking grinds to a halt. And I don't think you really understand the context of this until you understand what this article is. This is from the Telegraph in the UK. And their subtitle is, Fresh Loans in China's Shadow Banking System Evaporated to Almost Nothing from $160 billion in January. Now, the weak data that's coming back from China and Japan has led to a very, very sharp sell-off in Asian stock markets and the biggest one-day crash in iron ore prices since the Lehman crisis. Why aren't you hearing about this on the media? Why aren't you hearing about this on the news? Any news, Fox included. The Shanghai Composite Index of Stocks fell below a key level of 2,000 after investors reacted with shock to an 18% slump in Chinese exports in February. An 18% slump. And to signs that credit is wilting again. Iron ore fell 8.3% alone. Fresh loans in China's shadow banking system evaporated to almost nothing in comparison to January, where there were $160 billion. Suggesting that the clampdown on the $8 trillion sector is hard-bitten. Quote, this is Wei Yao from Societe Generale. It seems that rising default risk has started to erode Chinese investors' confidence. Together with continued regulatory tightening on banks' off-balance sheet activity, we are certain this slowing trend, a credit trend, has further to go and will inflict real pain on the economy. Now, Japan's economy is losing steam again. And here's the problem with that. Japan has never really, truly recovered. And they are bracing themselves for a consumption tax that's going to rise from 5 to 8%. It's a 3% increase, on a consumption tax that is charged over there. And their economic growth has dropped from 4% in early 2013, a year ago today, to 0.7% in the fourth quarter. Now, their trade deficit is hitting record highs. China has allowed a corporate bond default that no one's talking about. And, you know, it's not just China and the yuan. Russia has seen a significant drop in the ruble because of what's going on over in the Ukraine. They spent an extraordinary $50 billion building Sochi for the Olympics. And now they're going to, for all intents and purposes, take over at least Crimea and perhaps the remainder of the Ukraine. That's not inexpensive. They stand to lose significant amounts of revenue as the gas pipelines and the oil pipelines that run through the Ukraine that all stem and begin in Russia and then exit the Ukraine to go to Eastern and Western Europe. And if they lose those oil pipelines and those natural gas pipelines, for all intents and purposes, folks, Russia's done. They're out of business. That's the only thing keeping Russia afloat. It's what's been keeping them afloat and allowing them to grow and Putin to grow in audacity and power. Now, you can't believe for a moment that they are, China and Russia, are not inextricably linked to the U.S. dollar. And let's not kid ourselves. The real truth and the real numbers here, which again, and I'm going to jump back to a point I made in the first segment here about how the Obama administration has falsified the numbers of DHS and immigration to pretend as if he's really making a lot of deportations when he's really double counting. In other words, he's counting those people that they turn back at the border, which no prior president has done. But it's not limited only to that. This administration also has redone the mathematical equations to determine things like what the inflation rate is and other market and economy indicators, including unemployment. If you look at the real true numbers of unemployment, not just those who have been looking for a job in the last X weeks, but those who they classify as no longer existent people because they have stopped looking for a job, we are in excess of 20% unemployment. If you calculate the real true rate of inflation because they've also changed the method by which they calculate inflation. They took energy and food out of the equation, which gives you a false sense of security because you're not hearing the real numbers. The real numbers, when you put energy and food back into the equation and you calculate it the way it's previously been calculated, we have been operating with an 11% inflation per year for the past 5. Ladies and gentlemen, you can only hide the truth for so long. The Fed, when Obama took over, had a $600-some-odd billion balance sheet. They're now over $6 trillion. In other words, they were just over $500 billion when this all began in 2009, 2008. And now they're over $6 trillion. People, the Fed has $6 trillion of debt that they're playing with. And they haven't actually ponied up the money to get that. That's the problem. You see, it's all smoke and mirrors. They're giving IOUs for federal IOUs, Treasury IOUs. The Treasury issues an IOU, and the Fed in turn issues another IOU and then prints money. The 17 trillion, 17.3, 17.4 by the end of the month roughly, is not even properly calculated. It already exceeds our GDP, gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is the sum total of all of the production of the nation. And we're at 100% GDP or greater. Anytime, and you can ask any economist about this, unless this is an economist that's on the staff of somebody in Washington or somebody else is in favor with some other totalitarianistic government, will tell you that when you strike 100% GDP in debt, the jig's up. Now, I just did an interview with Jack Spreaker, and he's with the Survival Podcast. Many of you know him. Many of you listen to his podcast daily. He's got some 80,000 people that listen and capture the Spreaker Podcast and the Survival Podcast. And I'm going to I have to write an article about it, and I'll be posting it up before the end of this week. And what we were talking about, and Jack has broken the story and the news on something that most of you aren't aware of, and you're going to be stunned when you find out what's happening. The savings accounts of Americans who are saving money through retirement plans, such as 401ks and what have you, and you have to understand the size of the retirement funds in the United States of America. That money is being funneled in a new way, and it's been a quiet little change that's been made. And if you have a 401k, I want you to go and do your homework on this. And here's what your homework is. There used to be, and this is only going back a couple of years, there used to be an option where you could take money from your 401k and put it into a cash option. Now, that's not a money market account, but it was a cash option. And you will notice if you go and look at your 401k and attempt to put money into a cash option that it is no longer there. And it is now being invested into a government securities option, which means that basically you no longer have the option to put the money into cash. It's being pumped into government treasuries. And so how this came about, you'll have to wait until you can hear the whole interview with Jack, because it's an hour-long interview. But the point is simply this. They are using Americans' retirement monies to help fund this. And they're using it in conjunction with the Fed, buying debt, monetizing our debt, which they swore up and down they would never do, but they're doing anyway. And they're now putting your money at risk, along with all of the rest of this faux money that's floating around that doesn't really even exist in the first place. You're being forced into buying treasuries even though you don't want them. And your money is not allowed to be kept in cash. Now, why did I start this with China? Because if China slips, if Japan slips, I want you to understand the implications. China is the second largest holder of our debt. Most people don't realize that. Japan is the second largest holder of our debt. China is the first. And Japan is not far behind China. China owns about $3.3 trillion, and Japan is only slightly below that. When you talk about the amount of risk that is associated with their collapse being contagious, if you will, to the United States, it's not a question, it's a fact. It's not a question of will it happen, it's a question of how bad will it strike us. So, and all the machinations and machinations and all of the shell game behind the smoke and mirrors, behind the scenes games that the Fed play won't do any good. Now, China last week allowed a solar company to default on their bonds. And this is the first ever failure in their domestic bond market. And here's the problem. When you start seeing them allow their own bond market and corporate bond market to default, that is a very, very dangerous sign. China's credit market was in a boom for a long, long time. And now the bubble is literally beginning to disintegrate in front of our eyes. China alone accounts for half of the 30 trillion increase in world debt over the past 5 years alone. Did you hear what I just said? China accounts for half of the $30 trillion increase in world debt over the past 5 years. Now, knowing that I just said to you when we began this that the international global governmental debt is now $100 trillion, has struck the $100 trillion market, and knowing that just in the last 5 years it has increased by $30 trillion, ought to have the hair on the back of your neck standing straight out. Folks, last year alone, between the United States and Europe, China invested $5 trillion alone. Just in those two. And I got to tell you, this cannot sustain. When your assets exceed, when your debts exceed your assets, you can no longer pretend that there is a viable alternative or a viable solution to overcome that. You can't buy your way out of it. You can't float your way out of it. You can't double count your way out of it. And recognize that when we talk about $100 trillion as the global debt, we're not even accounting for the fact that a lot of that is due to double counting. In other words, it's much higher than $100 trillion. What I am going to tell you is this. If you have not taken the time to seriously evaluate the preparations that you should be looking at for, if nothing else, just the feeding of your own family in a short-term, mid-term, or long-term crisis, then I cannot encourage you strongly enough to begin that process now. I don't know when you're going to need it, but I know one thing. You are going to need it. We have a program that Battery Station has put together for America's Voice Now listeners, and I want you to participate in it because we don't make a dime on it. America's Voice Now doesn't make a penny on it, and Battery Station doesn't make a penny on it. In fact, it costs them money to do this for you. But they've graciously agreed to put this effort together to allow our own community, and this is, of course, a program that's really geared for locals, so if you're listening across the country, find an alternative solution similar to this in your community. But the Battery Station allows you to participate in our America's Voice Now radio co-op. So basically, you go down to the Battery Station, which is located on Washington Avenue, 303 Washington Avenue, and you ask to see the co-op catalog. And basically, you're buying bulk food at wholesale. Bulk food at wholesale. This is what the retail stores buy it for and then resell it to you at a profit. And right off the bat, you're going to save 30 to 50% over what your normal food bill would be. 30 to 50%, folks. Now, this is dry goods. There's no, this is nothing for the freezer or anything along those lines. This is just, bags of grain, bags of rice, bags of corn, wheat, flour, sugar, salt, the basics. But I got to tell you something. That's the kind of thing that you're going to find in very, very short supply. Just going to throw a little tidbit out to you that'll ought to shock you. The Ukraine, which we're all hearing about, is considered and has long been considered to be what's called the breadbasket of of Eastern Europe and Russia, and they produce the grain that feeds Russia. Period. End of argument. The Ukraine, geographically, is probably not much bigger than about Texas. And the Ukraine, last year, produced more grain and more foodstuffs solely and individually than the United States of America produced collectively. People, if that doesn't scare the heck out of you, nothing should. We're paying, through a farm bill of $1 trillion, half of which is borrowed, we're paying our farmers not to grow. Help me grasp the insanity of that. What would be the purpose of that? Other than an intentional, willful, manipulative intent to break the back, the economic, the financial, and the food value back of the United States of America. Let me tell you something. When you're hungry, you'll do anything and everything that you're told. When your little girl steps up to you and says, "Mommy, I'm really hungry, Mommy. I haven't eaten in 2 days." And your little boy walks up and says, Daddy, I can't. Daddy, I'm so hungry. I haven't eaten anything in 3 days. Daddy, what are we going to do? You will do whatever they tell you to do. You've been listening to America's Voice. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the CIA versus the Senate Oversight Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to see the thriller in Manila, this is it. We're talking about a serious, serious constitutional crisis here. And it's bleeding over. This is a level of rogue agency treason we've never seen in the United States of America. You're listening to America's Voice. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
want the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Well, hello there, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. I'm Michael Evans. I'll be your host here this morning, and thanks for joining with us. Glad to have you on board. You're joining us in the second half of our program this morning, in our third segment. And we're going to dedicate the next two segments to talking about something which is very, very, very important to our republic. It's been brewing for months, but it finally spilled over into the public. And if you're not aware of what's going on with this, you should be. Dianne Feinstein, the other day, went out on the floor. Now, she is the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee. She's the chairperson, chairwoman, whatever you want to call her. And they are under a requirement to oversee the intelligence agencies in the United States. Now, that includes, the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI, and any other intelligence agency, the NRO, for those of you that aren't familiar with the National Reconnaissance Office. Now, that's the organization that owns and controls the satellites that that monitor everything on the ground, domestically and foreign. And she's the chairwoman. And a while back, they began to investigate, and this has been going on for a long time now, the secret rendition program that the CIA had back when Bush was in office. And the purpose of this was to take a look at the issues surrounding whether or not the rendition issues were, abusive of individuals' rights and so forth and so on. Now, if you recall, when Obama was trying to get into office, he was swearing that he was going to prosecute Bush administration officials that had participated in these, black ops renditions. So anyway, the Senate Intelligence Committee had to gain access to CIA documents, which are highly secure. Everything's a super secret, right? And so the CIA said, "Here's what we'll do: we'll give you access to some computers in a secured building, and you'll be able to access CIA documents that way." Now, the CIA was choosing what documents that the Senate would be able to see. And there were, folks, we're talking about like I think the number I heard was 60 million documents or something, some staggering number of documents. And it might have been 6 million, and I've forgotten, so please don't hold me to that. But it's a lot of documents. Apparently, there was about 1,000 documents, including some video, that these Senate Intelligence Committee staffers found in the trove of documents that were there, that they removed and stored securely within the scope and the framework of their authority and within the scope and the framework of their security clearance, because they were damning evidence of abuse by the CIA. Well, the CIA went out and monitored these computer systems and actually removed some of the documentation that was on there in an attempt to keep the Senate Intelligence Committee from seeing the true extent of whatever they've done. And I mean, I can't pinpoint what it is because nobody's supposed to see this. And when they were accused of it by the Senate Intelligence Committee, privately now, this is them having an internal argument, they admitted to it. Now, John Brennan, who's the director of the CIA, who's, by the way, a Muslim, a convert, in a discussion the other day that he was having with, of all places, the Council on Foreign Relations. Why is the head of the CIA, having a conference with the Council on Foreign Relations, which is supposed to be a corporate entity, not a government policy group? Well, you all know how I feel about the Council on Foreign Relations. I consider them even more dangerous than the Federal Reserve. But the CIA has been lying to Congress, and to make matters worse, they've been spying on Congress, spying on the staffers, spying on these machines. And then they lied to the Senate, to the Senate Intelligence Committee. Now, look, if you are an oversight committee, I just want to put this into the right perspective for a moment so that you grasp the concept of this. You're charged with overseeing intelligence agencies, CIA, NSA, NRO, FBI, whatever. And you are, therefore, given the highest levels of security clearance because whatever these agencies are doing, you have to be aware of it, right? So, I mean, there's nothing that they're doing that you shouldn't be aware of. There's nothing that they're doing that you're not privy to. There's nothing that they are participating in which is above your clearance grade, right? I mean, let's be honest. How can you oversee an agency if you don't have equivalent clearance to see everything that's going on? This would be the equivalent of asking a police chief to investigate his own department, but saying that there's certain files and things that and reports that he can't see that his officers are creating. I mean, the absurdity of it is obvious. So there is no limitation to what the Senate Intelligence Committee can and should know about what the CIA and other agencies are doing. And yet the CIA feels that they are above the law. And they feel that they have a right to be greater than the master as a servant. You know, the question at this point is between what's going on at the NSA and what's happening over at the IRS and what's happening over at the EPA and what's happening over at the CIA. Is there anything else that our federal government can do, and the intelligence community specifically, and the executive agencies, is there anything else that they can do to destroy their own credibility anymore? I mean, I don't think that there is a more suicidal bunch out there, and I'm speaking, I'm speaking not literally, but figuratively. I don't think that there is a more suicidal group out there than these agencies within the federal government that apparently feel as if they are rogue operators and have no oversight and can do as they choose based on their own determination of what's appropriate behavior. Is there anything else that they can do to destroy their own credibility? Is there anything else that they can do that is violative of the Constitution? Is there anything else that they can do to endanger us more in the face of our neighbors, in the face of our friends, and in the faces of our enemies? Is there anything else that they can do to increase the risk of injury to this nation? I don't think so. The one other thing that they could have done They did. They turned back and bit their master. They spied on Congress. The heck were they thinking? Dianne Feinstein went out on the Senate floor the other day, and she made a 38-minute speech. Now, those of you who have ever heard this show before, you know that I abhor Dianne Feinstein. She is the epitome of an individual who is drunken on her own power and authority, drunken on the authority and the power of the federal government. She is an ideologue, a self-serving individual who truly believes that she knows more about what's right for you than you could possibly ever know. And she is so removed because of her term and how long she's been in Congress that she's so removed from the realities of the world for the 315 million of us that don't live in that little bubble. Maybe it's 312 million of us. That she can't possibly be objective. Well, okay. The point is this. I don't like Dianne Feinstein one little bit. I classify Dianne Feinstein as a traitor on the highest order of the American people and her role and her oath. However, she brought this out publicly. In a 38-minute speech on the floor in the Senate, she openly exposed what's going on. And she has flat out accused the CIA of searching these computer files that were used by her staffers, and 3 major implications. And they open up the door to criminal violations because this stuff, and constitutional violations. One, violating the Fourth Amendment, because this computer system belonged to the Senate Intelligence Committee. And the CIA, by breaking in there without a warrant to do so, essentially, was one agency violating a branch of government's right to privacy. Secondarily, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is a congressionally created act of law that makes it a crime, a criminal act, to hack into a computer system, especially one that's owned by the government, and an executive order number 12333, which bars the CIA from using domestic surveillance within the United States of America. And this is also a violation of the separation of powers, because remember that the CIA is an executive agency, and Congress's job is to oversee them and make sure that, you know, it's the old adage that the legislative is the watchdog of the executive and the judicial. The judicial is the watchdog of the legislative and the executive is supposed to be a watchdog over the judicial and the legislative. Each of the 3 powers that be are required and demanded to be a watchdog over the other. Now, I'm the first to admit that they have hopelessly failed in that effort. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But it doesn't change the realities of the fact that the law still stands, and that's what they're supposed to be doing. Now, John Brennan, who's a convert to Islam, many Americans don't know that, by the way, and you've got to ask yourself this question. Why does the mainstream media keep that knowledge from you? Why does the mainstream media not talk about that? If for argument's sake, this was still the Bush administration in play, and anyone else that a Republican president or a conservative president had put in authority as the director of the CIA had converted to Islam, do you think, or let's not use Islam, let's say the conversion was to Judaism or Buddhism, or was a convert from atheism to Christianity, do you think the media would expose that and constantly introduce John Brennan, the director of the CIA, who is a recent convert to Islam? That's exactly how they'd introduce him every single time. So why don't they for John Brennan? Well, for two reasons. One, he's a democratically appointed director, and two, they don't have a problem with Islam. Now, he spoke at the CFR, and he tried to deflect this 38-minute speech that Dianne Feinstein made on the Senate floor. And I've listened to portions of it because I've been unable to find the entire thing because it wasn't exclusively about this issue. But the problem here is you got to recognize something. This is not a partisan issue. Dianne Feinstein is a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat and a big government proponent. She is one of the strongest proponents and supporters of the surveillance state that we live in. And John Brennan is also, he's one, a Democrat, two, a strong proponent of the surveillance state, and three, he's an appointee by Obama. You know, the other day I put a quote up on our website, on Facebook, excuse me, and you know I put up a lot of quotes from a lot of founders and things like that, but this was one of mine. And here's what it is: the massive surveillance state being assembled is not intended to resolve non-existent crimes or keep you safe, nor is it to provide you with universal health care. It is being assembled to determine who among us will be a threat to those who consider themselves our masters. It is only about control. Now, Feinstein and Brennan are both not only believers, architects of this surveillance state. And for this thing to blow out and become public is, to borrow a phrase from Barack Hussein Obama, unprecedented. She came out and made a statement. She said, "I have grave concerns that the CIA's search may well have violated the separation of powers principles embodied by the United States Constitution, including the speech and debate clause. It may have undermined a constitutional framework essential to effective congressional oversight of intelligence activity or any other government function." Now, I got to tell you something, folks. Anytime you have an agency such as the CIA, who is in control of vast quantities of the nation's secrets. They know every little terror group around the world. They know every terror group domestically. They know they have secrets. They have secrets on the secrets of the people in the House and in the Senate and in the executive and in the judicial. I got to tell you something. When they resist oversight as a rogue agency operating independently of any authority, from the actual elected government people. I can't think of another word that better expresses it than treason. A Senate committee that's charged with oversight of an agency has a right to everything that that agency has, and nothing may be held secret. Nothing. And yet, that's exactly what happened. The implications of this are staggering. I'm going to talk to you next in our next segment, because we've only got a couple of minutes left in this one, about the response, however, of another individual that, quite frankly, is pretty negative about all of the surveillance state that's being built, and that's Justin Amish. He is a House member, and he came right out and made the following statement, talking to Dianne Feinstein about her outrage, or faux outrage, or whatever you want to call it, about the fact that the CIA is spying on her. Here's what he had to say. Hypocrites like you are why the public doesn't trust Congress. Boom. But I'm going to take it to another level, and when we come back, we're going to explore that a little bit, because I think he's missed the larger point. You see, the CIA's actions now have reached the border, let me rephrase that, have passed over the border into treason. Because when you have an agency with that level of authority, that level of knowledge, that level of power, that is operating in a rogue fashion, folks, treason is the only word that can be used to describe it. You're listening to America's Voice Now. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment. If you have an opportunity to, please make sure that you visit our sponsors. Go see our friends over at Wits End Classic Barbershop at 417-372-2027. Closed on Sundays and Tuesdays, but open up every other day of the week. You can get a great haircut there for $10. While you're there, you can swing into Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop, where you can find hundreds and hundreds of cigars in stock, ready for your purchase. And they also carry all manner of accessories and things associated with pipes and cigars and tobacco products. While you're there, in town, you can swing by Pizza Hut, get yourself a great lunch. Every day they have a pizza bar and a salad bar and a pasta bar. And please make sure that you visit those folks and take advantage of that. You can also get a hold of our friends over at Express Mini Marts 1 and 2, both located in the heart of West Plains, both with a drive-through. One across the street from the corner of 14 and 63 in Old Granny's Cafe, and the other across from the City Pool in West Plains. And finally, make sure that you see our friends at BatteryStation.com, 417-257-7799 at 303 Washington Avenue in West Plains. If you're interested in a website for your business, airbridgeweb.com. We'll be back in just a moment. All right. Thanks for riding with us this morning. I'm glad to have you on board. We have a ton of folks capturing the show live on our website. And whether you catch it on audio or video, that's your preference. I have a tendency to break monitor screens with my mug, so you're certainly welcome to capture us on audio only. I've got a face made for radio. And that's an old joke in the radio business. But I'm probably a living example of that. I'm glad to see how many folks do stream the show live on Patriot FB and on America's Voice Now, and I encourage you to go to both. We post up articles and stories and under our news feeds on both of those sites every day. We also have a Facebook page that I would like you to visit, and if you don't mind, hit the like button. If you're capturing us on our Spreaker feed, that's our podcasting audio feed, then by all means, please do us a favor and go over there and hit the equivalent of a like button. Because that helps us to improve, and once we hit 100, we just started using this podcasting service, and once we hit 100, we'll be able to get onto iTunes radio, and that would dramatically increase our listenership. So I would greatly appreciate it if you would visit our Spreaker page, and you would hit the like button there. It looks like a heart, I guess. And that will help us to get the word, or get this program onto iTunes to help spread the word about America's Voice Now and what we do every day on the radio. You know, this issue with what the CIA is doing here is so far outside the boundaries of the rule of law and even good ethics, good morals, good conscience. Justin Amish was right when he looked at Dianne Feinstein, who's been a huge proponent of allowing the NSA to spy on you, and the FBI, by the way, to spy on you, while simultaneously considering herself protected from that same level of Fourth Amendment abuse. Now she's screaming Fourth Amendment abuse. Amish comes out and says to her, you know, hypocrites like you are why the public doesn't trust Congress. And I got to applaud Justin Amish, because I think that he is. I'm glad he had the courage of his convictions to come out and say that publicly, but I'm also a little concerned because I think he's missed the larger point. The larger point in this is that the CIA has become treasonous in this action. When you have an agency in the government with that level of authority and power, and they are acting as a rogue agency, and we can't deny that agencies go rogue, because according to the president and the IRS's own admission, the Cincinnati office was rogue when they were beginning to investigate and persecute, frankly, the conservative groups. How many rogue agencies are we going to allow before we declare the entire government, the Senate, the House, the executive, the judicial, and every extra-constitutional administrative agency in the nation that has no justification for its existence under law, before we declare the entire pot spoiled, rotten, and worthy of removal? With prejudice. What does with prejudice mean? In legal terms, when your case is dismissed with prejudice, it means that there is no recourse. The CIA is acting in a treasonous fashion here. And look, I mean, you know, I'm probably far more bold than the Rushes and the Glenn Becks of the world. I have no doubt that, but I've been having these conversations for quite some time now. But, it's fearful for me to say something like that. Because the truth is, folks, if we don't have our First Amendment and a right to speak out and to expose our grievances with our government, and when they are acting in a treasonous fashion, say so, then the Republic is dead. Amish is accurate, but he's missed the larger point. Perhaps because he's a member of Congress. The CIA is treasonous. The entire Congress is guilty. The president has become so lawless, even the sympathetic media on the progressive left is beginning to openly state it. The courts are trying to pretend it's not happening so that they can say, we've got clean hands here. And they can claim impartiality and immunity. I got to tell you, folks, the entire lot, every single one of them, needs to be removed. And removed with prejudice before they boil all of us in the snake oil of their suicidal intent to self-destruct. I know that's harsh words. But I don't really care. There's an excellent article out about this on Freedom Outpost. The article title is, and this is posted on our Facebook and YouTube and website, Amish to Feinstein on the Fourth Amendment Pity Party. Hypocrites like you are why the public doesn't trust Congress. And it's an article by Melissa Melton. Here's what she has to say. We've entered a Mel Brooks-level government comedy. Can someone play a sad song on the world's smallest violin for this woman? In the ultimate dictionary definition, act of hypocrisy, head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Dianne Feinstein, the Democrat from California, is complaining that the CIA violated her committee's Fourth Amendment right when she claims the agency removed several key documents from committee computers. There's actually over 1,000, by the way. She actually found it within herself to be surprised and outraged that this could happen to her, accusing the CIA of breaking federal law and, quote, undermining the constitutional principle of congressional oversight. Feinstein said, I am not taking it lightly. The Department of Justice is reportedly investigating the matter, and Feinstein, if you recall, has been a huge proponent of the NSA's overreach in basically every other government Big Brother spy program you can imagine in recent years. When it's aimed at the American people, of course, but not her. Here's just one example from not even a month ago in the LA Times. Quote, LA Times. Senator Dianne Feinstein offered a full-throated defense of the government's collection of data on billions of American phone calls, saying Wednesday that the National Security Agency's practices have safeguarded the nation without trampling on civil liberties. What keeps me up at night and I see enough of the threat stream to know that is possible. Apparently, that same heartfelt, full-throated defense of government spying, overreach, safeguarding the nation does not apply to herself and her committee. In response to Feinstein's hypocritical outrage of being targeted by the intelligence community, Representative Justin Amish, the Republican from Michigan, sent this message out on his official Facebook page. Quote, Amish, she has no problem with U.S. intelligence agencies like the NSA violating the Constitution by spying on hundreds of millions of Americans without probable cause. This kind of hypocrisy is one of the biggest reasons the public can't stand Congress. Bingo. Here's the problem. By the way, Edward Snowden came out and lambasted her for being a complete and utter hypocrite and, well, whatever. I mean, Snowden said Feinstein is a hypocrite for blasting the CIA spying. But here's where things have gotten to, folks. Irrespective of how else you look at this, we now have a national government that is so intrusive and abusive of you that they are monitoring your telephone calls, your emails. They are monitoring what sites you visit on the internet. They are monitoring your purchases, everything that you do by credit card, every transaction that you make in your bank. They have, for all intents and purposes, put down a worldwide global net, and they don't care who they catch in that net. All of their protestations to the contrary are lies, misrepresentations, and cover. The truth is, we now live in an official, however unexposed or unannounced, police state. And anyone who does not believe that is either fooling themselves or been promised some benefit by keeping silent. We're talking about public figures here. Anyone in the community, the citizenry, the general non-governmental, non-political individuals within the country who don't realize that are doing so basically at their own peril. The massive surveillance state being assembled is not to solve non-existent crime. Now we're seeing the NSA sharing information and the FBI sharing information with the DEA. Tell me how that's how that's intended to be a part of the terrorism promise or the protection from terrorism promise. It's not intended to solve non-existent crime or to keep you safe. It's not to provide you with universal health care. Because now your health care is the latest addition to the network. When you submit to Obamacare's mandated application process, mandated at the point of a gun, you're required to provide all of your personal information, your income, how long you've worked there, where you work, how much you make. You're required to provide all of your health records. And all of this information is being gathered, categorized, compartmentalized, collected, and put into a file called You. They know everything about you. Your photograph is being taken with your driver's license and entered into the database. Your birth certificate and your documentation who indicate who you are is being scanned and collected and added to the database when you go to renew your driver's license. This massive surveillance state is not to solve crime. It's not to keep you safe. It's not to make sure that you have universal health care. It's being assembled to determine who among us will be a threat to those who consider themselves our masters. It is only about control. For those of you who are vainly endeavoring beyond all reason to attempt to hide from the truth of this, to not acknowledge it, to pretend that the wind hasn't picked up and the rain isn't pouring down and the storm is coming as the fire burns your home behind you. I don't understand why you will not look at reality, accept it, acknowledge it, and then take the appropriate action necessary. You know, our founders, and one specific guy, really I think he really put forth and embodied that we as a nation need to again resurrect amongst ourselves. Those of us who aren't a part of the machine of government, but are yet constantly being crushed. There's a guy named Patrick Henry, and he was considered outspoken. And he was considered to be he wasn't polished like Thomas Jefferson. He wasn't, a John Adams with a lot of the gentlemanly way of putting things. He was more bold and more blunt in his speech. Some would say aggressive. And he sat at a group that were trying to determine what to do about the incursions of the British. And at that point, the British were wreaking havoc on everything. Commerce, private lives, invading people's homes, going in without search warrants and stealing possessions, raping women and children, literally. They would invade a home and take it over, stay in the home. They would slaughter and kill the farmers' livestock and feed their troops. They would walk into any business they chose and wipe it out. And a group of them were sitting there trying to determine what to do. And there were those who were saying, listen, it's not as bad as you think, or we've got to have peace. There's always that crew out there that says, we can't act. That this is for our own good. And Henry turned around and I can see him in my mind. And I can see him just sitting there listening to these pacifists and apologists bloviating and just... And finally, in frustration, he stands up and he says, "It is in vain, sir, to extenuate this matter. You gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. And the next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that you gentlemen wish? What is it that you would have? Is life so dear, or your peace so sweet, that you would purchase it at the price of chains and slavery?" And I'm sure they blustered and puffed up and said, "Oh, it's unfair for you to say that, Mr. Patrick Henry. How dare you question our allegiance and our honor?" But Henry was right. The war had actually begun. And the clash of resounding arms was already echoing through the land. We are no different. Our times may be filled with more news and more gadgets and more products and faster ways to traverse and move. But do not fool yourself. The war has already begun. It is being waged upon you right this moment. And you can cry, peace, peace, all you want. But there is no peace. In order for there to be peace, two have to agree upon that. And I'm telling you that your government has declared war upon you and will not cease. You may cry peace, but you cry only for yourself. And when the enemy has refused that peace, then you are a fool. The next gale that sweeps in from the north, the next gale has already begun. You say, you're over-dramatizing it. You're overreacting. It's not that bad. And I say you're wrong. I say that you are a fool. And that your mistake will cost you, your progeny, and the rest of us our republic. Feinstein's not going to save us from herself. Obama and his minions, these agencies, an agency that's grown so strong and powerful as to turn about on its own master and bite. And you would trust that dog in your home. I question your judgment. Time for you to rise, America. Read your Declaration of Independence again, in its entirety. Read it, chew it, savor it, taste it, then swallow it, and finally, live it. Or you may go from us in peace. And may you be remembered as those who were willing to lick the hands that feed and wear the chains that our tormentor has placed upon you. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Patrick Henry. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. Please feel free to communicate with me at mike@americasvoicenow.org. Bless y'all and have a great day. Time, America, for some serious conversations with ourselves. See you in the morning.